Greetings. I'm Jackie Davis, and I chair Arts and Culture at One Shared World. And I'm the former executive director of the Lead Center of Kansas, and then the executive director of the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts at Lincoln Center. I'm delighted to welcome you to our conversation about sustaining culture in times of current and past cultures. This is the third program in a series that is founded on the topic and the broader issue of our collective global interdependence as presented by One Shared World, the International House at the University of Chicago, and the Brademas Center at New York University. I have personally been involved with global interdependence and the role of the arts in enhancing communication among cultures for over 20 years. In the program series over the last 2 years, we have looked at Cambodia, the Ukraine, Egypt, Middle East, and other hotspots around the world. And today, we expand on that conversation yet again. Recordings of the first two panels can be found at One Shared World website. Now, I'll repeat that. That is oneshared.world. I hope you'll go and look. Now on to today's conversation. We're honored to be joined today by 4 exceptional arts professionals. The moderator is Christopher Hibma. He is currently the interim COO for HB Studios. Formerly, he was global director for Videos for Change, senior artistic producer at the Guthrie Theater, and spent 16 years as the leader of the Sundance Institute theater program. He's also the founding chair of Zukak Theater in Beirut, Lebanon. Next, we have the panels. Lara, playwright, director, producer, CEO, artistic director of the Baxter Theater, Cape Town, South Africa. Sarah Vanderik, dramaturge, Brussels, Belgium. And Maya Zabib, director, performer, writer, co-artistic director of Zukak Theater. So Christopher, now I turn it over to you to begin the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jackie, and welcome everyone. It's such a privilege to be in community with you today. I come to this conversation not just as a moderator, but as someone whose life has been shaped again and again by the extraordinary ways in which culture holds us. Through upheaval, collective crisis, and global uncertainty, we have witnessed how the arts don't simply decorate our lives, they animate them. They challenge us to stay awake to complexity. They make belonging possible. My own work has taken me across continents and into rooms where systems were breaking down, but where creativity has endured. That experience crystallized something I now hold as a core belief, that creativity is currency, not in the transactional sense, but as a form of deep, enduring value. In times of rupture, it is imagination, not capital, that becomes our most valuable resource. And artists are among the few who know how to generate, share, and redistribute this currency freely, generously, and often without guarantee of return. Today's conversation exists because of that spirit of generosity. And I want to acknowledge Jackie for summoning us here today. She has long understood what many institutions are only beginning to realize, that culture is not a luxury. It is infrastructure. It is connective tissue. And in the face of injustice or collapse, it is how we remember what wholeness looks like. We gather under the banner of One Shared World, which recognizes that our well-being is not a zero-sum game. My liberation depends on yours. My safety depends on your safety depends on mine. The idea is simple and radical, that the future must be built from interdependence, not isolation. In this light, culture becomes not just a means of expression, but a blueprint for coexistence. So, as we step into this dialogue, sustaining culture during past and current conflicts, I invite us to hold a wide frame. This is about more than resilience. It's about listening deeply, staying with discomfort and imagining what wants to emerge beyond survival. It's about what we metabolize. It's about how we metabolize grief into movement, silence into ritual, and rupture into relationship. We're joined, as Jackie said, by three extraordinary artists, Maya, Lara, and Sarah, each of whom brings a practice rooted in integrity, complexity, and care. And rather than introduce them myself, I'd like to invite them to do so in their own words. And one final invitation before we begin. While I may be holding the role of moderator, I hope this conversation won't feel like a sequence of monologues or directed interviews. Instead, let's treat this as a living dialogue, a circle of creative minds speaking across experience, across disciplines and time zones. So Maya, Lara, and Sarah, please feel free to respond to one another as the spirit moves you. Interject, reflect, extend, disagree, offer nuance. Let's allow this space to be as alive and surprising as the art we all make. So, with that, let's begin. Would each of you take a moment to introduce yourselves, your creative practice, and offer a sound, a smell, or a space that holds resilience for you? Let's start with you, Maya.
Hello, everybody. It's nice to be with you virtually today. I'm a theater maker, and I co-founded Sukak Theater in Beirut 19 years ago. We are a collective. We make theater together, and we train young people to make theater together as well in our studio in Beirut. We make work that starts from a personal desire towards a global concern. The personal is political again and again. So, in a way, our work is rooted in our experience as humans living in a certain context, but also as artists who have something to say. And that's what we try to teach in our context for the younger generation. And I focus on teaching at the moment because for the last few years, this has been a very important, a very important element of our process, how to transmit the practice and the knowledge and the culture of theater in Lebanon. I mean, for me, the space that is very important is the stage. And I was recently telling this story about how we were stuck in a moment of not knowing where to go during the bombing last winter, and the only place we could go to was the theater, and it was very strange to use the theater as a shelter one night. And it made sense for all of us to be there. So the theater always is a space for safety and togetherness.
Thank you, Maya. I know you have a strange relationship to that word resilience, and I'd like to hear more about that in a little bit. Thank you for sharing. Lara, tell us a little bit about yourself, your creative practice, and what's a sound, smell, or space that holds resilience for you? One moment, let's get your microphone unmuted here. There you go.
Okay. My name's Lara Foot, and I run the Baxter Theatre in Cape Town. I've been there for a long time now, nearly 15 years. My roots are in the Market Theatre in Johannesburg. I started making theatre in the late 80s, 90s during the height of apartheid. in South Africa, and understood that I needed to be part of whatever the market theatre were doing. My first play that I saw there was like lifting a curtain onto the truth of what was happening in our country. I was only about 17, and I decided on that night that that's what I wanted to do. So always seen theatre as a space for truth and for congregation and for bringing people together, and as Maya says, a shelter. So then moved on years later to the Baxter Theatre, where I became the artistic director and concentrated mostly on new South African work, my own work, but the work of the community. And I'm still doing that, trying to encourage people and trying to find a safe space for them to tell stories about their own lives. And my space, or my what gives me resilience, I think injustice always triggers resilience. So my space is inside me, ready to find that space to explore and to imagine and to have some kind of a sense of a pretext or a pre-mise en scène, which I can dream about or imagine about, to create a story. And same as Maya, that space exists in a theatre, specifically a poor theatre, a black box type theatre, where I know that that's going to hold our stories.
Thank you. Thank you, Lara. It's such a pleasure to see you again. Sarah, how about you next? Tell us a little bit about yourself, if you might.
Hi, everyone. I was very surprised to get the invitation to this panel in the beginning, because I'm a Belgian dramaturg living in Belgium. I didn't migrate during my life, and I come from a middle-class family with a lot of opportunities to study. So I studied theater in a Belgian theater school. And then I didn't know what to do when I got my degree, so I spent a long time working with big Belgian companies. I worked a long time for Alain Platel, the Belgian choreographer, and I toured the world with his work as a production manager in the beginning, not an artistic function. And I guess this was how to say, I was brought up by what I would call the United Colors of Benetton ideology. Like, if we bring every different kind of profile together and we listen to each other and we share some food, then everything will get better in this world. This was my let's say political sociological education, and then I worked for a choreographer who really believes in this ideology also for a long time. So my touring of the world was also mainly very inspiring and great experiences, but also a true fiction of expat touring. And then in 2012 I stopped working with Alain, and I had two professional experiences that changed my life. The first one was that I started to work for a cultural center in a small Belgian village. We would call it city, but on the world scale, it's really small. That's called Ostende. And a cultural center was opened there. There was no building before in this small city to make theater, see theater. People were doing things in their backyards or abandoned buildings, but so no official theater. And we opened one, and no audience came. We had the greatest program ever of really interesting work and a lot of things, and nobody came. And so then, after touring the world with a piece for full houses for almost 10 years, I never asked myself the question, why do people even come to theater? And so then I was forced to ask myself the question, like, what are we doing in this community here? And why would they come to this place? What are their stories here? Are we telling them something, giving them something that could make them dream about another kind of life? Or what is the purpose? And I had the big chance to work on that for over 6 years in that community. That's not my hometown, so I also had to get to know the people and that specific community during those 6 years. And it's no surprise, of course, we ended up bringing their stories to the stage and creating, like giving them the official cultural space to share their lives in a lot of different ways. And in about at the same time, a little bit later, I work as a dramaturg, a freelance dramaturg also, and I work with choreographer Serge Koulibaly, who is originally from Burkina Faso, whom I met in Belgium, where he also lived. But so in 2014, he created a creation space in Burkina that's called Ankata, and he tries to work about half of the creation period there and half in the Western world where there is the money to create these pieces. So he invited me to come to Burkina in 2014. 2014 was the year of Ebola. So my whole family was very scared of what are you going to do? You're going to Africa, that's already very scary. And then there is big risk of getting sick. Anyway, I went. And we were creating a piece that's called Nuit Blanche. And it's about the piece we were creating is speaking about the night before a regime falls, inspired by a lot of African regimes where there is a president on power for a long time. And in the beginning when we were, so I got into a context where I really knew nothing. I didn't know the difference between a house and a shop. And anyway, I had to get to know this whole reality. At the same time, we were making a piece about the fall of a president. And in the beginning, I was there for 6 weeks. In the beginning of the creation, people were very scared about what we were doing. In the performance, there's a rapper also saying things. And so the people living around the workspace telling us, yeah, maybe you shouldn't do this, and maybe be careful, you might end up in prison, all these kind of things. And then the president fell the day after the premiere in 2014, the regime fell. And so all of a sudden I was in a country where everything was very unstable. I couldn't get out. I wasn't in danger at all. I was sitting in a very safe place. But I couldn't communicate because, of course, all phone lines were dead, cut to prevent bigger trouble happening or to control the movement. So I couldn't warn the people at home that I was fine. I didn't know how long it was going to last. I saw this whole evolution of a community being very scared for their lives, growing into a community that was very hopeful and finally won over the power. 10 years later, a lot of things happened in between, of course, but in 2014, it was a very strong and hopeful moment. And so these two experiences in a small town in Belgium and in the capital of Burkina made me realize that theater is not just something we do to tell stories, but that it's something, for my part at least, we do to have a connection with each other inside a community and to depending on what the community needs, we can use to dream or imagine is maybe a better word, an evolution for that community.
It sounds personally transformative that you had those experiences, and speaks to the interconnectedness of us all and the transformative power of not only of theater but of art in general. Thank you for sharing those beautiful experiences. Maya, I'm curious how you hold space for creation when the world outside of your door is unraveling. You know, when or do you, like, how did the creative process continue or not for you as things erupted in the last couple of years?
Sometimes you just have to stop making theater. There are points where you have to stop, that it doesn't make sense to make theater. But it always makes sense to be in the theater.
Mm.
So what we did, for example, in the last year when we had to cancel our festival due to the Israeli war on Lebanon, we created an alternative way of gathering, which was what we called the open mic in the face of monstrosity. And so we invited people to come and share whatever they wanted about where they are at that moment. So sometimes it was about the situation. People wrote poems or discourses or letters. And sometimes it's just singing, like people were singing or dancing or making theater, like small scenes together. And it was just about, not really the artwork per se itself as a value, but the power of being together in those moments and, just touching somebody, like not feeling that you're crazy. Just looking at someone in the eyes and saying, we're still here.
Mm.
We can do things. We can do things that are not just about being safe. So that is important, rather than necessarily finding a space for creation. It's very hard to carve out a space for creation under the war situation that is not, I guess, when there's a kind of a status quo that this is the war's like this for a while, then you can create, you can become like we are humans are very, get used to things, unfortunately, and adapt. So yeah, you can find a place for creation when something is happening for over a long period of time, and that the rules of engagement, what they are, so you can start to function in that sense. But for us, it was more about just being together.
Well, as someone proud to be associated with Zukok, I was always so blown away by the letters from the ground part of the face in the face of monstrosity, and they're on your website, which people watching this program can go and check out. Those are some remarkable essays from members of your community, and people may not know that Zukok is so much more than a company. It's a collective. How do you and others in the collective of Zukok keep that collective spirit alive when fear and fatigue set in?
When we started in 2006, it wasn't really about making art necessarily. It was just about working professionally together, training together, reflecting together. And we still do that even though we're making work together as a collective. And it's obviously it's not easy to work in a group. There's a lot of back and forth, a lot of different ideas, a lot of, you know, um, people think differently. But throughout the years, we've managed to find ways of working that are very satisfying and sometimes extremely hard, but in the end, very satisfying. So, what happens is we really hold ourselves and each other accountable all the time. And we've, transmitted this way of working to the team that we work with and to the young people also who are around us. And it's exhausting, but it's also freeing because you're always and at every moment holding yourself accountable for all the decisions that you're making, um, in a very civil way. And we're living in a country where, it's very much about segregation and religious affiliation and political corruption. It's liberating to be able to function in this kind of utopia where everybody's accountable. And at the same time, there's a culture of joy and love that we try to cultivate as well. So it's very satisfying, I would say.
I've witnessed
I'm
that.
not sure if my Wi-Fi is bad or if
We
you're
can hear
getting
you
me
just
because I'm
fine.
cutting a bit.
We can hear you. Thank you for sharing about the collective realities of being a part of the Zukok community, now in its 19th year there in Lebanon. Lara, you both have an artistic responsibility and an institutional, probably, expectations, right? They both kind of coexist. How do you hold both of those in moments of national trauma?
I mean, they speak to one another really because there's a necessity to hold both because I believe in the need or the power for theatre. So on some levels, it's the same as creating a project or creating a play. It's holding a space where others can come and create a project, and taking care of that space so that you create a home for artists. When I arrived at the Baxter, it was a very colonial space, and not all artists, especially artists from the community in the townships, didn't feel welcome. And so it was my dream to create a space where everybody felt that they could say this is our home, especially young artists. Because that's what theater is, right? It's exciting. Theater is about, bringing people together and sharing the space and learning from one another. So a lot of people ask me, how do I do both? And yes, sometimes I get really frustrated because I have to deal with things that are just outside of the art, like, security issues in the building or financial issues, or all the time fundraising. But when I'm bringing artists into the space, or whether I'm creating a piece myself, it's the same thing. It's just we're all doing the same thing. And listening to Maya, I mean, she's really in the thick of it. I come from a past where, say in the 90s, we were very much in the thick of it, where there was a lot of violence, where there was, bombing, and not to any extent like what Maya's going through. And I was on the phone to Maya in the thick of it last year when she was supposed to be bringing a production to the Baxter, that we were hosting, and she couldn't get out of Lebanon. And she said, carry on, just do the production. She'll send her a voice, we'll record her voice because she narrates the production, because she wants the work to be seen. And I was like, no, and the rest of the team as well. No, we have to be with us. So we postponed the production, but I'm not sure that people can imagine. Maya's very brave about it as she describes it, and keeping the company going and getting people in to carry on telling their stories. But that you're in a situation where you fear for your life and your family, and you're still sharing the space of storytelling. And that's, I guess, when we go back to resilience, which was your first question, the resilience of an artist who believes that art and storytelling and connection and communication, the same as what Sarah was saying, has a definite meaning in the world.
I'm sure those moments of connection that you and Maya made during those moments fed your soul, Maya, as it did me and our international community checking in during those moments of terror. Lara, have you ever made a work that cost you more than you anticipated?
You mean in my life, or financially?
No,
You mean my spirit?
I don't mean cost financially. I mean in other ways.
In my life, yeah, I have actually. I made a work based on my family, which was looking at a triangle of relationships between bipolar personality disorder mother and a very kind and holding father, and their friend who was a psychiatrist, and very much based on my own life and terrible things that happened to this poor woman. And it took me 7 years to write it, and when I finally put it on, it was an enormous success. And it really finished me. It was, I've worked on so many plays that deal with social issues and mental health issues, but this was specific to my own life. And I think I gave too much, although it was a big success. I go like, wow, that was maybe a little bit too much. So I'd be cautious in doing that again. Because obviously, as you know, I mean, so many stories sit in your subconscious, and so when you bravely go forward, telling these stories, it's easier in a way to tell stories that you witness rather than stories that you experience.
It's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that vulnerability with us and the audience today. Maya, I know that you are in the middle of creating a piece that's very personal to you. Perhaps we can hear more about that later. Sarah, you mentioned the Benetton ad that you were looking as to one of your aspirational or sort of the templates that you had looked at before. What practices help you hold space for others' stories with integrity now, with a bit of hindsight behind you? Or another way to ask this
I'm
question.
learning to be silent. I will try to explain a bit better. Basically, it's that I'm learning to be silent. I learned through working with very different kind of people and in very different contexts, that part of my education is to know things and to collect knowledge. And of course, I wasn't aware at all that this is not necessarily an education that's world widespread, but it's a very Western ideology that I was brought up with. So I spent my life knowing things, and if I went somewhere or I had an exchange with somebody about a subject that I didn't know, my system was formatted to know as soon as possible what I didn't know, so that I could have the knowledge. And I am still unlearning that. I'm learning to not know things and to be silent and to create space for other kinds of knowledge or expression or values to exist without me having an opinion about them or without me wanting to do something with that or wanting to learn it in this way. And by doing that, I think I became a much better dramaturg using that practice in general. Also, when I, let's say, work in Belgium on a very local story, which is my culture, my story, I still practice not knowing what the other people in the room are bringing to it by just shutting up and waiting.
Can I say something?
Yes.
Please.
So we had this fascinating movement at the Baxter, but the Baxter's on the grounds of the University of Cape Town. It's not a university theatre, but it's on the grounds of the university. And 2016 we had somewhere around 2016 we had a massive movement on campus called the Fallist movement, and essentially it started with a massive demonstration to remove the statue of Cecil John Rhodes, clearly the colonialist that had, wiped out the whole of Western Cape and taken land and pillaged and all the rest, made people slaves and horrible man. And there was an enormous statue of him at the top of the mountain of the university. And of course, the statue just stayed there post-democracy, it stayed there. And it was complicated because there was Rhodes bursaries and there was a Rhodes legacy of money, and blah, blah, blah. But of course, the statue was triggering for many, 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 many thousands of students. And when they asked to bring it down, people didn't listen. People in power, the vice chancellor, etc., didn't listen. And eventually they protested, and thousands and thousands and thousands of students protested, and eventually brought a big crane into the theatre and pulled that statue down. And it started a movement actually across the world. We made a play about it called The Fall, which toured internationally. It was at St. Anne's in Edinburgh, blah, blah, blah. It was a fantastic production. But one of the things that happened was that the students occupied all the lecture rooms, all the administration buildings, and they made a rule that white people weren't allowed to speak. And of course, all the people and lecturers, some of them, it was a huge, how can you say I'm not allowed to speak? Everyone's got a voice. And the students very bravely, and they were like 20, 21 years old, said, you may not speak. You can listen. You may not speak. They got militant about it. If you speak, you get out. And people had to listen. Whether you were a student or whether you were the VC, you had to sit there and listen. And it was the best thing that ever happened to the university. It wasn't so much, the Baxter wasn't really involved because we're on campus, but we weren't part of that, and the students had already warmed to the Baxter. But I was involved on other levels. And what came out of that, out of people listening in terms of systemic racism, was an enormous learning curve. And we have, to be very grateful to the students to do that, to make people listen. And so it's amazing what Sarah is saying about that.
Yeah. I also believe, to me, a similar thing happened the first time I went to work in Burkina. So I was invited to work as a dramaturg on a project. I do this whole, from my point of view, courageous decision to fly into Ebola and to trust my friend who invited me to work there. And it's impressive because it was my first time also going there. I was alone in the traveling part. And I arrived in the working space, and also one of the performers, Black performers, said that I couldn't speak. And my job is to watch and speak. I don't do anything else in a theater room. And then, of course, I had the choice to accept or to not accept, but this was kind of the only option. And I chose to shut up and to cry in my bed at night for many nights, not knowing what to do. It was also, I mean, it was the first time I was really, I mean, I've been white my whole life, but I haven't been white my whole life being part of a white majority. And all of a sudden I was really white and I couldn't participate in the conversation because of being white for weeks. For a few weeks. And it was a terrible, I mean, I'm not going to say it was a joyful experience, but I'm very grateful for this violent experience that it was imposed on me in a very violent way, but it changed it. Yeah. I don't think anything could have brought me this kind of knowledge in the sense of what it is to be a community with very different people, and that it's not we just stand next to each other and we look differently and we smile.
Imagine we could make a number of people just be silent for a couple of months and listen. It'd be fantastic.
I love this idea about not knowing also, Sarah, that you're talking about. And it's something that I really when I go into a room as a director, because I have many different hats, as you know. So in my director hat, mostly, I go from a place of doubt. And throughout the years, I've learned to accept that and to say it even to the actors. And of course, when you work, I mean, when I work with the actors in the company, it's different. But when I work with, professional actors in Germany, for example, who are used to directors who know everything, or when I work with opera singers, it's very hard because they want you to know everything. But it's always proved to be, for me at least, for my process, it always proves to be magical. Because when you enter and from a place of not knowing, of course, it is a place where you are allowing the other voices to be there, but you're also allowing your inner voice that you don't know yet, and your intuition to take the center stage. And it's scary as hell, but it's amazing. And every time it's like, risking it. It's a risk, but it's a risk that I love taking in making theater with other people. So yeah, just wanted to say that.
I feel like we are just like scratching the surface of like a conversation. I think we need like 6 more of these conversations to keep going.
I knew this was going to happen.
Yes. I mean, when beautiful minds gather in a space, this is what happens. As we begin to close this circle a little bit, if you could whisper one truth to a future generation of artists living through conflict, what would it be? What would it be? Lara, I'd love to hear from you.
Your voice matters. It really matters. If I witness what's happened in South Africa, and I've been privileged to witness such enormous transformation, and People resist change. Nobody wants to change anything. They don't even want to change, what music they like. They're not going to change their government or their ideology or their, expectations. So to have a change in government like we did, for the positive in such an extraordinary way, and to be part of the theatre movement at the time, right now, you wish you could write a play or do a play that would make enormous change, that would stop violence against women and children, or will stop genocide in Gaza, or you want to write this play that's going to do something enormous, but that doesn't happen. What happens is that your voice matters, and so you can contribute to a consciousness that when I watched the practice plays at the market, it made me into an activist. It made me go to protest. It made me part of the change. And so your voice matters. That's the first thing I'd say. Like, don't think if you're only playing to 3 or 4 people, that came to watch you play, that it doesn't matter. It matters. And then also to say, lean into the dark. Don't be scared to lean into the dark, because when you lean into the dark, you'll be surprised what you find as a collective, as a cast, as a company. You'll be surprised the kinds of light that you can find when you're brave enough. Yeah, that's what I'd say.
I love how beautiful that is and directional. Sarah, how do you feel about the future generation? What might you say to them about not just living, but getting on the other side of conflict?
I teach also, so I have to deal with at least the close future generation, and I'm hesitating between two things. One thing that I need them to know and to believe in is that you need to communicate. So when you use your voice, you go on a stage to say something, and you say it to a community. And that community can be one person, it can be 1,000 persons, or 1 million in your imagination. But you need to consider where your communication goes. And connected to that, maybe that's more on a personal level, but I'm very touched these days by the work of a Turkish writer. Maya will smile probably because I keep on saying. Anyway, I'm very inspired by a Turkish writer who is named Ece Temelkuran. And she, during a lecture recently in Brussels, she explained, she uses the sentence that we need to have faith in humanity, which in the current context might be a very complicated thing. But she explains it as on the same level as people who believe choose to have faith in God. And the choice to have faith makes God or humanity possible. And so it's a very activating position to choose to have faith in humanity. And I find this such an energizing, motivating thought that I spread it around to the next generation, because I think it's a very important social, political, human position to keep on choosing to have that faith.
This is a beautiful circle of humanity right here. And Maya, take us home with some words to the next. I know you talk to the next generation a lot, like a lot of these artists here, but you, through your mentorship and Kawali's program at Zukok, are often in space with young people. What do you tell them?
I think regardless of the practice that they're doing, I would tell them find your tribe first. Find the people that you can work with, the people that think like you, the people that you can make change with. And the second thing would be master your tools, your practice, work. Do the work. Don't take the easy way. Just do the work every day, like labor. If you're a writer, write every day. If you're a dancer, dance every day. If you're a poet, write poems every day. It's labor. And the labor, as Lara was saying, that this labor makes a difference when heard, when received through communication, like Sarah was saying.
Well, I want to offer my deepest thanks to each of you, to Maya, to Lara, to Sarah. I feel like there's a number of threads I wanted to go deeper into, but our time is ending. I want to thank you for your courage, for your clarity, for your cultural labor that you so generously carry. Thank you for not just sharing your work, but for your ways of seeing, for offering your creative practices as portals into memory, into reckoning, into becoming. You've reminded me and us that art is not ornamental, it is essential. It's a sacred inheritance, a blueprint for what comes next. So to those of you that are listening or watching, thank you for being a part of this moment. I've recently returned from the Azores, where I had the gift of spending time with a group of artists and visionaries and systems thinkers as part of a group called the Regenerative Media Lab. And there, surrounded by volcanic soil and wind-carved coastlines, we talked about regeneration, not as a metaphor, but a methodology, not just of ecosystems, but of economies, imaginations, and relationships. And I was reminded the future is not a destination. It's something we grow, something we compose, something we co-create through rhythm, through reciprocity, through radical listening. So, if you're wondering where to begin, begin here, with the stories that stirred you, the questions that unsettled you, the possibility that perhaps even now we are building something brighter than we know. Your creativity is a kind of currency. Spend it with intention and share it generously. And the conversation doesn't end here. Visit oneshared.world to explore how you can be a part of this growing community of artists, thinkers, doers, and dreamers, working toward a more interdependent, just, and imaginative future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.